In the autumn of 429 before Christ, a man lay dying in Athens, while the city he had built into the most radiant civilization the ancient world had ever seen was being consumed by plague. His name was Pericles. For more than 30 years he had never held a crown, never commanded an army by force, never seized a throne, and yet Thucydides, the most rigorous historian of antiquity, wrote plainly that Athens was in name a democracy, but in reality governed by its first citizen. How does a man rule without a title? How does he raise temples that still stand 2,500 years after his death, reshape the meaning of citizenship itself, and then lose everything, his sons, his authority, his life, to a disease no philosophy could explain? This is the complete story of that life. Not merely the famous moments carved into textbooks, but the full arc, from a boy born around 495 before Christ into the most politically dangerous bloodline in Athens, the Alcmaeonids, a family both blessed and cursed by their role in creating democracy. You will witness his education under the philosopher Anaxagoras, who taught him to see the universe as governed by mind rather than gods. You will stand on the Myx Hill as he rises through the wreckage of assassination to claim leadership of the democratic movement. You will watch the Parthenon rise stone by stone on the Acropolis, not the bleached ruin we know today, but blazing with painted color under Attic sunlight, scaffolding creaking, chisels ringing, funded by the tribute of an empire he forged from a voluntary alliance. You will meet the woman who shared his life, Aspasia of Miletus, brilliant, foreign, despised by his enemies, and loved by him with a devotion that defied his own citizenship law. You will see his friends dragged into courtrooms on charges of impiety aimed ultimately at him. You will understand the calculated gamble of his war strategy, retreat behind the long walls, surrender the countryside, trust the fleet, and you will feel the horror when plague turned that rational plan into a death trap for tens of thousands packed within those very walls. What makes Pericles extraordinary is not merely what he built, but what he proved possible. He demonstrated that a single intellect, armed only with language and vision, could guide a free people to heights no monarch had achieved. The Parthenon, the tragedies of Sophocles, the histories of Herodotus, the philosophy that would produce Socrates, all flourished under the conditions he created. And yet his story is also a warning. The empire he forged bred resentment. The war he accepted devoured him. The democracy he championed would, within a generation, execute its greatest philosopher and surrender to Sparta. The truth of Pericles is stranger and more human than any legend. A man of Olympian composure who wept publicly when begging the assembly to grant citizenship to his last surviving son. A strategist of cold rationality who chose love over political safety. A democrat who ruled like a king without ever admitting it. If you value complete journeys through the lives that shaped our world, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring back one extraordinary life, the real human being behind the immortal name. Let us begin where all legacies begin, not with marble, but with blood. With a family already entangled in the dangerous experiment of Athenian democracy, and a child born into a city still trembling from war. In the year 495 before the Common Era, or perhaps a year earlier, the ancient sources do not agree, a boy is born into one of the most dangerous households in Athens. His father is Xanthippus, a military commander of rising reputation, a man who married above his station into the most storied and most cursed political dynasty the city has ever produced. His mother is Agariste, granddaughter of Cleisthenes, the man who, a generation earlier, dismantled the old tyranny and gave Athens its democracy. Through her veins runs the blood of the Alcmaeonids, a clan whose wealth built temples at Delphi and whose ambition toppled kings. But the Alcmaeonids carry something else, a hereditary pollution, a religious curse dating back more than a century, to the massacre of suppliants at the altar of Athena during Cylon's failed coup. That stain has never been fully washed away. Every generation, political enemies invoke it. The household where Pericles opens his eyes sits in the Deme of Cholargos, north of the city walls. Terracotta tiles overhead, a courtyard open to pale Attic sky, the smell of olive oil and wool. Servants move through corridors. His mother's family connections ensure that even in infancy, this child exists at the intersection of wealth, intellect, and political peril. Athens in these years is still young in its experiment. The reforms of Cleisthenes are barely a generation old. Citizens gather on the Nix Hill to vote, but aristocratic families still dominate through networks of obligation, religious authority, and military command. The agora below the Acropolis hums with potters, merchants, and men arguing politics beside the painted stoa. Democracy is not yet a settled thing. It is a wager, contested daily. When Pericles is perhaps 5 years old, the news arrives that shakes every household in Attica. The Persians have been defeated at Marathon. The city erupts in pride. But the threat has not passed. It has only paused. His father Xanthippus rises in prominence through these years, prosecuting the hero Miltiades after Marathon, establishing himself as a voice of democratic accountability against aristocratic excess. Yet in 484 before the Common Era, the assembly turns on Xanthippus himself. Citizens scratch his name onto pottery shards, ostraca, and he is banished for 10 years. Pericles, now a boy of perhaps 11, watches his father leave Athens under the sentence of ostracism. The lesson is indelible. In a democracy, the people's favor is a tide that rises and recedes without warning. But the Persian king Xerxes is marching west with an army beyond counting, and Athens recalls its exiled men. Xanthippus returns. In the summer of 480 before the Common Era, the entire civilian population evacuates Athens. The Persians burn the temples on the Acropolis, smash the ancient wooden image of Athena's sanctuary. Pericles is 15. He crosses the strait to Salamis with his mother, with the women and children and old men, and from that rocky shore he can see the smoke rising from the city of his birth. Then the Greek fleet engages in the narrow waters. The sound carries across the strait, the crack of oars, the grinding of bronze rams against timber hulls, the cries of drowning men. By evening, the Persian navy is shattered. His father Xanthippus will go on to command the Athenian contingent at Mycale the following year, completing the liberation of Ionia. The boy who watches the smoke of his burning city from the shore of Salamis will spend his entire adult life rebuilding what was lost, not merely the temples, but the idea they represented. He has seen democracy exile his own father. He has seen a great empire try to extinguish his city. He has inherited a family curse that enemies will weaponize for decades. And he has seen, in the waters off Salamis, what free men fighting for their own city can accomplish against the largest army the world has ever assembled. All of this, the privilege, The danger, the destruction, and the impossible victory settles into the mind of a boy not yet old enough to carry a shield. The world that will produce the Parthenon begins here, in smoke and salt water, and the silence after battle. The smoke clears. Athens rebuilds. And in the years after Salamis, while the city raises new walls from rubble and broken tombstones, a young aristocrat begins the education that will make him unlike any Athenian politician before or since. Pericles grows into adolescence in a city intoxicated by victory, but uncertain of its future. His father Xanthippus commands the Greek fleet at the Battle of Mycale in 479, destroying the Persian naval base on the Ionian coast, a triumph that liberates the Greek cities of Asia Minor and confirms Athens as a maritime power. The boy's household rings with the prestige of this victory. But Xanthippus dies within a few years, leaving his son an inheritance of political connections, landed wealth, and the dangerous visibility of the Alcmaeonid name. The education that follows is extraordinary, even by aristocratic standards. Plutarch names two teachers whose influence proves decisive. The first is Damon, a musician and political theorist whose instruction in harmony and rhythm masks a deeper curriculum. The study of how sound moves crowds, how meter shapes emotion, how political persuasion operates through the ear before it reaches the mind. Damon teaches that musical modes correspond to civic temperaments, that the structure of a melody mirrors the structure of a state. Later Athenians will suspect Damon of being the hidden strategist behind Pericles' policies and eventually ostracize him for it. The second teacher transforms everything. Anaxagoras of Clazomene arrives in Athens around 480, a natural philosopher from Ionia who carries with him the intellectual revolution of the Eastern Greek world. He teaches that the sun is not a god, but a mass of burning stone larger than the Peloponnese. He proposes that mind, nous, is the ordering principle of the cosmos, separate from matter, arranging all things through rational design. In the garden where Anaxagoras teaches, beneath plane trees with sunlight filtering through dusty leaves, the young Pericles encounters a universe governed not by divine caprice, but by intelligible cause. This changes him permanently. Plutarch records that Pericles acquires from Anaxagoras a loftiness of purpose and a freedom from superstition that his contemporaries find almost unsettling. He learns to speak of eclipses and meteors without fear. He develops the famous composure that Olympian calm his enemies will later mock and his admirers revere. Through his 20s, Pericles remains cautious. He avoids the assembly floor where older men dominate. He serves in military campaigns whose details the sources do not preserve. He watches Cimon, the conservative aristocrat and hero of the Persian Wars, command both armies and popular affection through lavish generosity. Pericles studies this model and rejects it. He will not buy loyalty with personal wealth. He will offer something else, a vision. His first recorded public act comes in 472, when he is approximately 23 years old. He serves as Chorigos for the theatrical production of Aeschylus's great trilogy, whose surviving play is The Persians, a drama depicting the Battle of Salamis from the Persian perspective, staged barely 8 years after the event itself. The Chorigos finances the chorus, costumes, and training. It is an enormous expense and a calculated political statement. The play celebrates Athenian naval victory, the democratic fleet, not the aristocratic cavalry. It glorifies the triumph Pericles witnessed as a child from the shore. The production wins first prize at the city Dionysia. In the theatre of Dionysus, carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, 15,000 citizens watch the chorus of Persian elders lament their king's hubris. The wooden benches creak. The masks amplify voices across open air. And somewhere in that audience, or standing in the wings where the Choragos oversees his investment, Pericles makes his first mark on Athenian public consciousness, not as a speaker or a general, but as a patron of democratic memory. He has chosen his stage carefully. The theatre is where Athens tells itself what it means to be Athens. The young man with the philosopher's education and the cursed family name has announced, quietly but unmistakably, which side of Athenian politics he intends to occupy. The mind shaped by Anaxagoras and Damon now turns toward the city itself, ready to reshape it in turn. The decade that follows is one of patient maneuvering. Athens in the 470s and 460s before the Common Era is a city divided between two visions of itself. One camp, led by Cimon, son of Miltiades, the hero of Marathon, looks toward Sparta with admiration, aristocratic, orderly, conservative. Cimon is generous, charismatic, a brilliant naval commander who sweeps Persian forces from the Aegean at the Eurymedon River. He opens his orchards to the poor, pays for public works from his own fortune, and names his son Lacedaemonius, after Sparta itself. The other camp, quieter, more dangerous, gathers around a man named Ephialtes. He is incorruptible, relentless, and he has identified the true seat of aristocratic power in Athens, the Council of the Areopagus. This ancient body, composed of former archons who serve for life, holds vast and vaguely defined authority. The guardianship of the laws, the supervision of magistrates, the trial of serious crimes. It is unelected, unaccountable, and its members are drawn almost exclusively from the wealthy. Ephialtes sees it as the last fortress of oligarchy within a democratic constitution. Pericles sees the same thing. The alliance between them forms in the shadows of the 460s, two men of different temperament united by a single conviction, that democracy must be complete or it is nothing. Pericles is still young, barely 30, and he lets Ephialtes lead. The strategy unfolds methodically. Ephialtes prosecutes individual Areopagites for corruption, case by case, eroding the council's prestige. On the Pnyx, where citizens gather on the bare hillside facing the Acropolis, speeches chip away at the mystique of ancestral authority. The moment comes in 462. Cimon is away. He has taken 4,000 hoplites to help Sparta suppress a Helot revolt, a mission that ends in humiliation when the Spartans, suspicious of Athenian democracy, send him home. The assembly is furious. Cimon's pro-Spartan policy lies in ruins. Ephialtes strikes. The reforms pass swiftly. The Areopagus is stripped of its political powers. Oversight of magistrates transfers to the Council of 500 and the popular courts. The guardianship of the laws passes to the assembly itself. What remains for the ancient council is jurisdiction over homicide and certain religious matters, nothing more. Athens has crossed a threshold. Sovereignty now rests entirely with the citizen body, unmediated by any aristocratic filter. The reaction is immediate and violent. Within months, Ephialtes is dead, murdered in the night. The sources name an assassin, Aristodicus of Tanagra, but the conspiracy behind him remains obscure. Aristotle, in the Constitution of the Athenians, records the killing without elaboration. Plutarch suggests oligarchic enemies. The truth vanishes into Athenian darkness. What is certain is the void that opens. The democratic movement has lost its leader, and the conservative faction moves to exploit the moment. Pericles steps forward. He is 33 years old. He carries the Alcmaeonid name, the education of philosophers, and a decade of careful political apprenticeship. The assembly knows his voice, measured, powerful, never theatrical. Within the same year, 461, Cimon is ostracized. Citizens scratch his name onto pottery shards, ostraca that archaeologists would recover from the Agora 24 centuries later, the handwriting of democracy preserved in broken clay. With Cimon gone and Ephialtes dead, Pericles stands alone at the head of the popular faction. He has not seized power. He has inherited a revolution and made himself indispensable to its survival. The Pnyx at dawn, the limestone worn smooth by thousands of feet, the speaker's platform carved from living rock, this is his stage now. Not the theatre, but the assembly. Not art, but the state itself. He moves quickly. Within months of assuming leadership of the democratic faction, Pericles begins reshaping the machinery of Athenian governance with a single principle: that democracy must not merely exist in law, but function in daily life for every citizen who walks through the agora gates. The first reform is deceptively simple. Jurors will be paid. 2 obols a day, later raised to 3 under pressure, placed into the hands of any citizen who sits in judgment. The sum is modest, barely enough to buy a meal and a measure of wine, yet its implications are revolutionary. Before this, only men of leisure could afford to spend entire days hearing cases in the Heliaea courts. Now the elderly, the poor, the small farmers whose olive groves barely sustain them, all can serve without sacrificing a day's income. The courts fill. Thousands of citizens rotate through jury panels of 200, 500, sometimes more. Justice becomes participatory on a scale no Greek city has attempted. The Theoric Fund follows a similar logic, channeling public money toward festival attendance so that even the poorest Athenian can witness the tragedies of Sophocles and Aeschylus, the comedies that mock the powerful. Culture is democratized alongside governance. Then, in 451 before the Common Era, Pericles proposes legislation that cuts in the opposite direction. The citizenship law restricts full Athenian status to those born of 2 citizen parents. Both father and mother must be Athenian. The measure passes the assembly. Its immediate effect is to sharpen the boundary between citizen and foreigner, to make Athenian identity a jealously guarded inheritance rather than an open door. Thousands are struck from the rolls. The law consolidates the citizen body as a privileged class, those who receive jury pay, who vote on the Pnyx, who share in imperial revenue. It is a democratic reform that simultaneously excludes. Pericles cannot know, in this year of political confidence, that this same law will one day deny legitimacy to his own son. Meanwhile, Athenian ambition reaches far beyond the Aegean. In 460 before the Common Era, an expedition of 200 triremes, originally sent to support anti-Persian revolts in Cyprus, diverts to Egypt, where a Libyan prince named Inaros has risen against Persian rule. The Athenians sail up the Nile, seize Memphis, and for 6 years maintain a precarious foothold in the delta. It is empire at its most reckless. The Egyptian sun beats down on hoplites trained for Aegean warfare. Supply lines stretch impossibly thin across open sea. In 454, catastrophe arrives. A Persian relief force under Megabyzus traps the Athenian fleet in the Nile channels. The defeat is total. Ancient sources vary. Thucydides implies the loss of the entire expedition, perhaps 250 ships and their crews. Tens of thousands of Athenians and allied Greeks perish in Egyptian marshland, far from the marble and olive groves of home. A relief squadron of 50 ships arrives too late and is destroyed in turn. The shock reverberates through the Aegean. Allied cities question whether Athens can protect them. The treasury of the Delian League, housed since 478 on the sacred island of Delos, suddenly seems vulnerable. Pericles and his allies seize the moment. In 454, the treasury is transferred to Athens, to the Acropolis itself, placed under the protection of Athena. The justification is security. The reality is control. 5,000 talents and more, the accumulated contributions of over 100 allied states, now rest within Athenian walls. Ships heavy with silver dock at Piraeus. Porters carry sealed chests up the sacred way. From this moment, the distinction between allied fund and Athenian resource begins to blur. 1/60th of each year's tribute is dedicated to Athena as first fruits, the apache, recorded on marble stelae that survive to this day. Column after column of city names and silver amounts carved in the precise letters of the Attic alphabet. The treasury will fund fleets, yes, but it will also fund marble. It will fund Phidias. It will fund eternity. Pericles has built his machine. Pay draws citizens into governance. Law defines who belongs. Imperial revenue fills the coffers. The democratic state and the imperial state become one organism, fed by the same silver, governed by the same assembly, led by the same voice on the Pnyx. His voice, elected year after year, never commanding, always persuading, always indispensable. The tribute lists tell the story. Carved into tall marble stelae erected on the Acropolis, they record with bureaucratic precision the 1/60th portion of each allied city's annual payment dedicated to Athena, and in doing so, they reveal the architecture of an empire that no longer pretends to be anything else. From 454 onward, the year the treasury crosses the Aegean from Delos to Athens, these inscriptions multiply. Hundreds of city names appear. Aegina, Byzantium, Miletus, Thasos, Naxos, Chalcis, islands and coastal towns stretching from Thrace to Korea. Beside each name, a sum in silver. The total annual tribute reaches perhaps 460 talents, a fortune that flows into Athenian hands, counted by Athenian treasurers, stored in Athenian temples. The allies who once contributed ships now contribute money instead. Only Lesbos, Chios, and Samos still maintain their own fleets. The rest have traded autonomy for convenience, and the exchange proves irreversible. Athens builds triremes with their silver. Athens trains rowers with their silver. Athens decides where those ships sail. The League Assembly on Delos, if it ever held real authority, falls silent. Decisions are made on the Pnyx by Athenian citizens under Athenian leadership. Cities that resist, Naxos years earlier, Thasos after, learn that secession is rebellion, and rebellion is crushed. Pericles understands the contradiction and embraces it. The League exists to protect Greeks from Persia. But what happens when the Persian threat recedes? Around 449 before the Common Era, Callias, son of Hipponicus, leads an Athenian embassy to the Persian court at Susa. The terms negotiated, if the peace is historical, and some ancient sources doubted it, establish a boundary. Persian forces will not sail west of certain limits in the Aegean, will not march within a certain distance of the Ionian coast. Athens, in turn, will not campaign in Persian territory. The fighting that began at Marathon, that blazed at Thermopylae and Salamis, effectively ends. This peace creates a crisis of legitimacy. If Persia is no longer a threat, why should allied cities continue paying tribute? Pericles' answer is audacious. According to Plutarch, he proposes a Congress decree, an invitation to all Greek states, those who fought the Persians and those who did not, to gather and discuss the rebuilding of temples destroyed during the invasion, the maintenance of common sacrifices, and the freedom of the seas. Envoys go out across Greece. Sparta refuses. The Congress never convenes. Whether Pericles genuinely sought pan-Hellenic cooperation or merely wished to demonstrate Spartan obstructionism, the result serves Athens either way. The tribute continues. The building continues. The empire continues. In the allied cities, Athenian officials appear, episkopoi, overseers, to monitor compliance. Athenian courts claim jurisdiction over capital cases. Athenian coins, weights, and measures are imposed, standardizing commerce but also stamping Athenian authority into daily transactions. Klerouches, settlements of Athenian citizens on allied land. Plant garrisons disguised as farms across the Aegean. The altetradrachm, heavy with Laurian silver, becomes the common currency of the eastern Mediterranean. The moral weight of this transformation is not lost on contemporaries. On the Knicks, opponents argue that Athens adorns herself like a vain woman with tribute stolen from allies. Plutarch preserves the accusation. Pericles' reported response is pragmatic. Athens defends the allies, and as long as defense is provided, Athens may spend the surplus as she sees fit. The allies owe money, not oversight. It is the logic of empire stripped to its essence, protection exchanged for obedience, security purchased with sovereignty. Beneath the arguments, the silver flows. It flows into the dockyards at Piraeus, where new triremes slide down ramps into the harbour. It flows up the slope of the Acropolis, where scaffolding already rises around the foundations of something unprecedented. The Delian League has become the Athenian Empire, and Pericles has made the transformation seem not like conquest, but like civilization itself. Marble and light paid for by the sea. The scaffolding rises. In the year 447 before the Common Era, work begins in earnest on the summit of the Acropolis, where the blackened ruins of the old temple, burned by Xerxes' soldiers 33 years earlier, have stood as a deliberate wound, a reminder of Persian sacrilege. Now Pericles transforms that wound into a statement of triumph. The foundations already laid for an earlier, abandoned temple are expanded, recalculated, reimagined. This will not be merely a house for Athena, it will be the crown of an empire. The architects are Ictinus and Callicrates. The overseer of all artistic work is Phidias, sculptor, visionary, and Pericles' close friend. Together they conceive a building unlike any Greece has seen. 8 columns across the front rather than the traditional 6-17 along each flank, every line subtly curved to correct optical illusion. The columns swell gently at their midpoints. The stylobate rises almost imperceptibly at its center. The corner columns lean fractionally inward. nothing is truly straight. Everything appears perfect. The marble comes from Mount Pentelicus, 10 miles northeast of the city. Thousands of blocks, each weighing several tons, are dragged down the mountain slopes on wooden sledges, loaded onto ox carts, and hauled along roads built specifically for this purpose. On the Acropolis summit, cranes powered by human muscle lift the drums into position. Masons shape each joint with such precision that no mortar is needed. Iron clamps and lead dowels hold the stones together. The ring of chisels against Pentelic marble becomes the sound of Athens itself, year after year, for over a decade. Plutarch, writing 5 centuries later, marvels at the workforce. Stonecutters, gilders, ivory workers, painters, embroiderers, metal workers, carters, rope makers, weavers, leather workers. The building program employs citizens and metics and slaves alike, distributing imperial wealth through the sinews of the city. This is deliberate. Pericles has made the Acropolis into an engine of employment as much as devotion, but opposition crystallizes. Thucydides, son of Milesius, not the historian, but a kinsman of Cimon and leader of the aristocratic faction, attacks the program on the Knicks. The charge is clear. Pericles adorns Athens like a vain woman with jewels, spending allied tribute on marble vanity, while Greece watches in outrage. The debates are fierce through the early 440s. Pericles' response, as Plutarch records it, is characteristic. He offers to fund the buildings from his own estate, provided his name alone appears on the dedications. The assembly, unwilling to surrender collective glory, votes to continue. In 443, the city ostracizes Thucydides, son of Milesius. His name, scratched on potsherds, is cast into the counting. He departs for 10 years. Pericles' authority stands unchallenged. Inside the Parthenon's cellar, Phidias constructs the chryselephantine Athena, nearly 40 feet tall, her flesh rendered in carved ivory plates fitted over a wooden frame, her robes and armor plated in hammered gold weighing perhaps 40 talents. She holds a 6-foot figure of Nike in her right hand. A shallow pool of water before the statue reflects light upward onto the ivory, preventing it from cracking in the dry air. Visitors entering from the eastern door would have seen her first in shadow, then gradually illuminated, gold catching the Attic sun through the open doorway. Beyond the Parthenon, the program expands. The Odeon rises at the southern foot of the Acropolis, a roofed music hall with a forest of interior columns, its tent-like roof said to echo the captured pavilion of Xerxes. The monumental gateway of the Propylaea, designed by Mnesicles, begins in 437, its marble wings framing the sacred way upward. The entire Acropolis becomes a composed landscape of approach, revelation, and awe. The marble is not white. It is painted, blue and red on the metopes, gilt on the column capitals, coloured wax on the pediment sculptures where gods and heroes wrestle in frozen motion. The Parthenon blazes with colour against the pale Attic sky, visible from the sea, visible from the agora below, visible from every road approaching the city. It announces what Pericles intends Athens to be, not merely powerful, but eternal. And yet the man who commands this transformation holds no crown, wears no purple, sits upon no throne. By the year 443 before the Common Era, with the ostracism of Thucydides, son of Milesius, Pericles stands without a serious political rival in Athens. His authority rests on nothing more and nothing less than the annual vote of the assembly, repeated each summer when the 10 tribal strategoi are elected by show of hands on the Nix Hill. The Nix at dawn. A semicircular terrace cut into the rocky hillside west of the agora. Its speaker's platform, the bema, a simple block of limestone facing thousands of citizens seated on the bare slope. No amplification but the human voice, no barrier between speaker and crowd, but the morning air carrying the scent of thyme from the surrounding scrub. Here, in this open theatre of democratic decision, Pericles speaks. And when he speaks, according to later sources drawing on eyewitness memory, the assembly listens with a stillness unusual for Athenian politics. His oratory is not the passionate improvisation of lesser politicians. Plutarch, drawing on 4th century accounts, describes a style of deliberate gravity, measured cadence, controlled gesture, a voice that never cracks into anger or flattery. He prepares meticulously. He rarely speaks unless the matter demands it, preserving the weight of his interventions. The comic poets mock his manner as thunderous, comparing him to Zeus on Olympus, calling him the Olympian, a nickname that captures both the awe and the resentment his composure provokes. The strategia itself is a military office. Each strategos commands tribal contingents in war and may be assigned naval or land operations. But Pericles transforms the role into something unprecedented, a platform for continuous political leadership. He is elected strategos for 15 consecutive years, perhaps more, an unbroken sequence that no Athenian before or after will match. The office grants him the right to convene assembly meetings, to propose motions, to address the people with the authority of a serving commander. He uses this procedural access relentlessly, shaping policy through persuasion rather than decree. He does not govern alone. The assembly retains sovereign power over war, peace, finance, and law. The Council of 500 prepares the agenda. The law courts judge every official at the end of his term. Pericles operates within these constraints, but he operates so skillfully that the constraints rarely bind him. He builds coalitions among the demes, rewards loyal supporters with appointments to the vast administrative machinery his policies have created, and ensures that the democratic majority sees its material interests aligned with his strategic vision. Pay for jurors, pay for rowers, public works employing thousands of craftsmen and laborers, all of this binds the citizen body to the imperial project he directs. Thucydides the historian, writing a generation later with the clarity of hindsight and the bitterness of Athenian defeat, delivers the judgment that will define Pericles for all subsequent ages. Athens under his leadership was, Thucydides writes, in name a democracy, but in reality government by the first citizen. The phrase captures the paradox precisely. Every institution of popular sovereignty functions. The assembly votes freely. Citizens speak against him without punishment. He can be, and eventually will be, removed from office by that same assembly. Yet for this long decade of unchallenged supremacy, his judgment prevails because no one can match his combination of intellectual clarity, rhetorical mastery, personal incorruptibility, and strategic foresight. He lives simply for a man of his wealth. His estate at Cholagos is managed by a single steward who sells the harvest whole and purchases household needs at market. A system Plutarch notes was designed to prevent any accusation of profiting from public office. He avoids banquets and private entertainments, maintaining a public austerity that shields him from the charges of corruption his enemies constantly seek to level. The Olympian walks through the agora with measured step, speaks when necessary, and returns home by the same road each day. The city he is building in marble and gold reflects an ambition that his personal life deliberately conceals. But behind that measured step, behind the Olympian composure, a transformation is taking place in the private life of Athens' first citizen. At some point in the mid-440s before the Common Era, the exact year is lost, Pericles divorces his wife. The sources do not preserve her name. She is an Athenian woman of good family, a relative of Hipponicus, and she has given him two legitimate sons, Xanthippus and Perilos. Plutarch records that the separation is amicable, conducted by mutual consent, and that Pericles himself arranges her remarriage to another man. It is a quiet dissolution, unremarkable by Athenian standards, where marriage is a contract between households rather than a bond of romantic attachment. What follows is not quiet at all. Aspasia arrives in Athens from Miletus, that great Ionian city on the coast of Asia Minor, a city renowned for its intellectual traditions, its wealth, and its cosmopolitan culture. She is not Athenian. Under the citizenship law Pericles himself proposed in 451, she can never become Athenian. She cannot marry an Athenian citizen in a union the law recognizes as producing legitimate offspring. She exists in the legal category of metic, a resident foreigner, taxed, protected, but permanently excluded from the political community. And yet this woman becomes the companion of the most powerful man in the Greek world. The household they share becomes something unprecedented. Ancient sources describe gatherings where philosophers, poets, and statesmen converse in her presence, where Aspasia herself speaks, questions, argues. Socrates, according to later Socratic dialogues, claims to have learned rhetoric from her. Whether this is historical fact or philosophical conceit remains debated, but the tradition itself reveals something extraordinary. A woman whose intellectual authority was acknowledged even by those who mocked her publicly. The comic poets are merciless. Cratinus calls her a concubine, a harlot. Hermippus will later bring formal charges against her. The comedians of the Lenaea and the great Dionysia parade her name before tens of thousands, crafting masks and verses that reduce a complex woman to a scandal. They call her the new Omphale, enslaving her Heracles. They whisper that she procures freeborn women for Pericles' pleasure. They suggest the wars Athens fights, even the Samian campaign, spring from her pillow talk, her Milesian loyalties. None of these accusations rest on evidence. All of them rest on the vulnerability her foreignness creates. The trial comes sometime in the late 430s. Hermippus, a comic poet turned prosecutor, brings charges of impiety, Aspasia, against Aspasia before the courts. The details are fragmentary. Plutarch reports that Pericles himself appears to defend her, that he weeps before the jurors, that his tears secure her acquittal. If true, it is the only recorded moment when the Olympian mask cracks in public, when the man who never attends banquets and never shows emotion stands exposed before the city he leads, begging for the woman he loves. The lamplight in their house on those evenings after the trial falls on a relationship the city cannot categorize. She is not wife, not hetaira in the simple sense, not political partner in any role Athens has language for. She is the mother of his third son, also named Pericles, a boy who under his father's own law is not a citizen. The intimacy between them endures for the rest of his life. Whatever the comic poets carve into their verses, whatever the prosecutors attempt in the courts, Aspasia remains beside him through the decade of supreme power and into the catastrophe that follows. She is the private truth behind the public monument, proof that the architect of democratic Athens lived a life his own laws could not contain. They cannot reach him directly. The man who stands before the assembly with that measured cadence, who has won election as strategos for 15 consecutive years, who commands the loyalty of the demos through reason and vision, he is too formidable to attack head-on. So they come for those he loves. The first blow falls in the year 438 before the Common Era, perhaps 37. Phidias, the sculptor whose hands shaped the chryselephantine Athena that now stands 40 feet tall within the Parthenon's cellar, whose artistic vision unified the entire Acropolis program, faces charges before an Athenian court. The accusation is embezzlement, that he diverted gold and ivory meant for the sacred statue to his own enrichment. The workshop dust has barely settled from the great project's completion. Phidias, according to Plutarch's later account, had anticipated such charges and designed the gold drapery of the goddess to be removable and weighed, a precaution that speaks to the political atmosphere surrounding the building program from its inception. Yet the accusation shifts. Some sources suggest a secondary charge of impiety, that Phidias carved his own likeness and that of Pericles onto the shield of Athena, inserting mortal faces among the gods. Whether convicted on the embezzlement charge or the impiety accusation, the outcome is devastating. Phidias dies in prison or flees to Elis. The sources diverge. The greatest artist of the age is destroyed. The pattern becomes unmistakable. Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, the philosopher who taught Pericles to see the cosmos as matter governed by mind rather than divine caprice, who explained eclipses as the moon's shadow and the sun as a burning stone larger than the Peloponnese, this man now faces prosecution under a decree proposed by one Diopithes, targeting those who teach doctrines about celestial phenomena or deny the gods. The decree is tailored like a weapon. Anaxagoras is its target, but Pericles is its true quarry. The philosopher who shaped the statesman's rationalism must leave Athens. He departs for Lampsacus on the Hellespont, where he will live out his remaining years teaching in exile. The city that nurtured Western philosophy expels one of its architects. Damon, too, the music theorist and political advisor whose counsel on rhythm and harmony extended to the rhythms of democratic governance, suffers ostracism. 6,000 sherds scratched with his name condemn him to 10 years beyond Attica's borders. 3 intimate companions, 3 prosecutions or expulsions within a span of years. Behind these attacks stand political factions whose names the sources partially preserve. Thucydides, son of Milesius, is gone, ostracized in 443, but his allies remain. A decree proposed by Dracontides demands that Pericles submit his public accounts for scrutiny before a jury using sacred ballots from the Acropolis, an extraordinary measure implying corruption at the highest level. The comic poets sharpen their verses. Cratinus calls him the onion-headed Zeus. The attacks probe for weakness in the democratic armor he has built around himself. The courtroom scenes unfold in the Stoa or the open agora, jurors seated on wooden benches, water clocks measuring speeches, bronze ballots cast into urns. The accusations against his circle are technically legal, procedurally correct. This is democracy consuming its own, The same popular courts Pericles empowered through jury pay now turned against those closest to him. The irony cuts deep. Yet he endures. Stripped of Phidias, bereft of Anaxagoras, deprived of Damon's counsel, Pericles remains standing. The assembly continues to elect him strategos. His oratory still commands. But the circle of brilliance that surrounded him, the philosopher, the sculptor, the theorist, has been shattered. He governs now more alone, the Olympian composure perhaps hardening into something closer to isolation. The decade's end approaches, and with it a war that will demand everything remaining. The war that reveals empire's true face comes not from Persia, not from Sparta, but from within the alliance itself. In the year 440 before the Common Era, the island of Samos, one of the last great tribute-paying states, still permitted its own fleet, revolts against Athenian authority. The dispute begins over Miletus. Samos and Miletus are locked in conflict over the border city of Priene, and when Miletus appeals to Athens for arbitration, the Athenian assembly orders Samos to cease hostilities. The Samians refuse. They will not submit their sovereignty to Athenian judgment. It is a challenge that strikes at the foundation of imperial control. If one powerful ally can defy Athens with impunity, the entire tributary system unravels. Pericles himself takes command. He sails with 40 triremes to Samos, deposes the ruling oligarchy, installs a democratic government, takes hostages, and leaves a garrison. It seems swift, decisive, complete. But the moment the Athenian fleet withdraws, Samian oligarchs, aided by the Persian satrap Pisouthnes across the water in Sardis, overthrow the new democracy, recover their hostages, and hand the Athenian garrison over to Persian authorities. The revolt is now open defiance backed by foreign power. The scale of Pericles' response reveals what the Delian League has become. He assembles a fleet that will eventually number over 200 triremes. The Aegean has not seen such concentrated naval force since Salamis. Pericles leads 60 ships initially, encounters the Samian fleet near the island of Traja, and fights a naval engagement that is fierce, contested, closely won. Samian triremes are no merchant vessels pressed into service. They are warships crewed by experienced sailors, and they fight with the desperation of men defending their freedom. After the naval victory, Pericles lands troops and besieges the city of Samos itself. The walls are formidable, built of cut stone, facing the harbor. Siege engines are deployed. Plutarch notes the use of battering rams, possibly among the first in Greek siege warfare. Yet Pericles divides his fleet, sending a portion to watch for a rumored Phoenician squadron that Persia might dispatch. In his absence, the Samian sortie from their harbor destroy the Athenian naval station, and for 14 days controlled the surrounding waters. Supplies reach them. Hope revives. Then Pericles returns with reinforcements. The blockade tightens. 70 additional triremes arrive from Athens. The noose closes around the island. By land and by sea, no grain enters, no ship escapes. For 9 months the siege endures. Inside those walls, hunger works its slow destruction. The Samian fleet, bottled in the harbor, rots at anchor. In the 9th month, Samos surrenders. The terms are severe. The walls are torn down, the fleet is confiscated, hostages are taken, and an enormous indemnity of perhaps 1,200 talents is imposed, to be paid in installments over decades. The oligarchs who led the revolt face punishment. Later accounts by Duris of Samos, himself a native of the island writing generations afterward, claim that Pericles had Samian triarchs and marines brought to the Agora of Miletus and beaten for 10 days before being clubbed to death, their bodies denied burial. Plutarch records this account but expresses doubt, noting that Thucydides and other reliable sources mention no such atrocity. The truth remains contested, but the accusation itself reveals how subject peoples remembered Athenian power. Pericles returns to Athens in triumph. He delivers the funeral oration over those Athenians who fell in the campaign, the first recorded instance of him performing this solemn civic duty. The dead are buried in the public cemetery at the Kerameikos, their names inscribed on stone. The cost has been real. Athenian lives spent, treasure expended, 9 months of sustained effort against a single island. The lesson radiates across the Aegean. Every allied city that contemplates resistance now understands the mathematics of rebellion. Athens will commit its full naval strength, endure months of siege, spend whatever is necessary. The alliance is no longer voluntary. The tribute is no longer contribution. It is taxation enforced by the greatest fleet the Greek world has ever assembled. Samos, once a proud maritime power, becomes a subject state, its walls rubble, its ships gone, its treasury drained for a generation. The iron fist has closed, and every island in the empire has felt the tremor. That tremor reaches Corinth within the year. The great commercial city on the isthmus, mother city to colonies scattered across the western seas, watches Athenian power expand with mounting alarm. And it is Corinth's own colony, Corcyra, the island we know as Corfu, that ignites the chain of events no statesman can extinguish. In the year 435 before the Common Era, Corcyra quarrels with its mother city over Epidamnus, a distant colony on the Adriatic coast. Civil war in Epidamnus draws both Corinth and Corcyra into open naval conflict. Corcyra, possessing the second largest fleet in Greece, defeats Corinth at sea. But Corinth begins building a massive armada for revenge, and Corcyra, unallied, isolated, desperate, sends envoys to Athens. The debate on the Nix in the summer of 433 is one of the most consequential in Athenian history. Corinthian ambassadors argue that alliance with Corcyra violates the 30 years peace signed in 446. Corcyraean envoys offer their fleet, 120 triremes, as the decisive weight that would make Athens invincible at sea. Pericles understands the calculus. War with the Peloponnesian League is not certain, but it is probable. Those ships cannot be allowed to fall into Corinthian hands. The assembly votes a defensive alliance. Athens sends 10 ships to Corcyra, enough to signal commitment, few enough to claim restraint. At the Battle of Sybota in 433, Athenian vessels intervene just enough to prevent Corcyra's annihilation. Corinth withdraws, humiliated, burning for retaliation. The first thread has been pulled. Then Potidæa. This city on the Chalcidice Peninsula is both a tributary ally of Athens and a colony of Corinth, receiving magistrates annually from its mother city. In 432, Athens demands Potidæa dismiss its Corinthian officials and tear down its seaward walls. Potidæa revolts. Corinth sends volunteers. Athenian forces besiege the city through the winter, and Corinthian blood mingles with Potidæan in the frozen trenches. Now Pericles moves with deliberate provocation. The Megarian decree, passed sometime around 432, excludes Megara from every port and market in the Athenian Empire. Megara, Corinth's neighbor and ally, faces economic strangulation. The decree's precise motivation remains debated by ancient and modern historians alike, but its effect is unmistakable. It forces Sparta's hand. Spartan embassies arrive in Athens through the autumn and winter. Their demands escalate. First, lift the siege of Potidæa. Then, rescind the Megarian decree. Finally, let the Greeks be autonomous, a formula demanding Athens dismantle its empire entirely. Each embassy meets the assembly, and each time Pericles rises to speak. Thucydides preserves the essence of his argument. Athens must not yield to ultimatums, for the first concession made under threat guarantees endless future demands. To retreat now is to accept subordination. The assembly votes for war. Not with enthusiasm, with grim resolution, guided by the voice they have trusted for 3 decades. In the spring of 431, King Archidamus of Sparta leads the Peloponnesian army across the Attic border. Tens of thousands of hoplites march through the olive groves and wheat fields of the Athenian countryside, torches ready. Smoke rises from farmsteads that families have worked for generations. Pericles has already given his orders. The rural population streams through the gates, carrying what they can. The long walls, those parallel corridors of stone stretching to the sea, become Athens' lifeline and its cage. The strategy is clear, rational, unprecedented. Surrender the land, command the sea, outlast the enemy's patience. Athens will not meet Sparta's phalanx in open battle. The fleet will raid Peloponnesian coasts, the treasury will sustain the city, and time will prove that Spartan invasions cannot break walls fed by the sea. It is the most disciplined gamble in Greek military history, and it depends entirely on one thing Pericles cannot control: that nothing unforeseen strikes a city packed beyond its capacity with refugees, livestock, and the desperate hope that their first citizen has calculated correctly. The unforeseen arrives not in the first summer, but in the silence between campaigns, in the pause when Archidamus withdraws his Peloponnesian columns from the ravaged Attic countryside, and the farmers peer from behind the walls at blackened fields and stripped orchards. That first invasion lasts roughly 40 days. The Spartans cut vines, burn farmsteads, trample the barley harvest across the Thriasian plain and into the fields of Achanae, close enough that their cooking fires are visible from the walls. Inside, the displaced thousands seethe. Acharnian charcoal burners, men who have watched their livelihood reduced to ash, demand that the cavalry ride out, that the hoplites form up, that Athens meet this insult with bronze and blood. Pericles refuses. He will not convene the assembly while tempers run this hot, a decision within his authority as strategos, though it strains the democratic compact to its limit. Instead, he sends the fleet. 100 Athenian triremes, reinforced by 50 from Corcyra and allied contingents, round the Peloponnese and strike at coastal towns. Methone, Phaea, settlements along the Laconian shore, the raids demonstrate that Sparta's homeland is not untouchable. Simultaneously, Athenian forces expel the population of Aegina, replacing them with Athenian settlers, securing a strategic island in the Saronic Gulf. The first year's ledger, measured coldly, favors Athens. The walls hold, the fleet dominates. The treasury, swollen with 6,000 talents at the war's outset, sustains the effort. Pericles has calculated correctly. Then winter comes, and with it, the dead. The Athenian custom for those fallen in war is ancient and solemn. The bones of the dead are gathered by tribe, laid in cypress coffins, carried on wagons through the streets to the public cemetery in the Kerameikos, that quiet district beyond the Dipylon gate, where the road to the academy begins. One empty bier, draped and carried, honors those whose bodies were never recovered. The procession moves slowly, women keen at the graveside, and then a man chosen by the city ascends a high platform built for the occasion and speaks. In the winter of 431 to 430 before the Common Era, that man is Pericles. What he says, or what Thucydides reconstructs from memory, shaping it with his own literary genius, becomes the most celebrated political speech in Western history. The funeral oration does not dwell on the dead. It speaks instead of what they died for. Athens itself becomes the subject. The city is an education to all of Greece. Its democracy trusts the many, not the few. Its citizens deliberate before they act, finding words not an impediment to action, but an essential preparation. Its doors stand open to the world, relying not on secrecy, but on the native courage of its people. Poverty is no bar to service. Private life is free from suspicion. The law stands equal for all. These words rise from a platform overlooking fresh graves, spoken by a man who knows the war has barely begun. The funeral oration is not naive idealism. It is strategy rendered as poetry, a reminder to a shaken city of what it is fighting to preserve, a justification for the suffering already endured and the greater suffering Pericles surely senses ahead. Thucydides places it here with devastating structural purpose, because everything that follows will test every claim the speech makes. The cypress coffins rest in the earth of the Kerameikos. The carved stellae bear the names of the fallen, organized by tribe: Erechtheion, Aigais, Pandionis, each list a catalogue of families broken. Incense smoke drifts across the burial ground in the pale winter light. Somewhere beyond the walls, the stripped fields wait for a spring that will bring the Spartans back. And somewhere in the crowded streets behind the long walls, in the makeshift shelters and the sacred precincts converted to refugee housing, in the stagnant water and the close quarters where tens of thousands breathe the same air, something invisible is already stirring, a contagion that no wall can stop, no fleet can outrun, and no strategy, however brilliant, has accounted for. It arrives in early summer of the year 430 before the Common Era, carried into Piraeus on the ships that are Athens' lifeline. Thucydides, who will contract the disease himself and survive, records its origin with the precision of a man who understands that what he witnesses must be preserved exactly, because no one who comes after will believe it otherwise. The sickness begins, he writes, in Ethiopia, passes through Egypt and Libya, then strikes the port. Within days it is inside the long walls. The symptoms unfold in a sequence that Thucydides catalogues with clinical detachment: violent heat in the head, redness and inflammation of the eyes, the throat and tongue turning bloody, sneezing and hoarseness, a cough descending into the chest, retching, convulsions, the skin breaking into small blisters and open sores, an internal burning so fierce that sufferers cannot bear the touch of even the lightest linen, that many throw themselves into cisterns and water tanks seeking relief. Most die on the 7th or 8th day from the internal fever. Those who survive the crisis often lose their fingers, their toes, their sight. Some lose their memory entirely, waking as strangers to their own families. The disease finds its perfect host in the conditions Pericles' own strategy has created. Behind the long walls, the population of Attica is compressed into a space designed for far fewer souls. Refugees from the countryside sleep in makeshift shelters, in temple precincts, in stifling wooden towers along the fortifications. The summer heat of Attica presses down on streets where sanitation has collapsed under the sheer weight of numbers. Funeral pyres burn continuously. The smoke hangs over the city in a haze that does not lift. Thucydides describes the social disintegration with the same measured voice he uses for battles. The dying lie unattended. Bodies stack in temples, in streets, along the roads. Sacred laws governing burial are abandoned. Families heap their dead onto pyres built by strangers, or simply place corpses on pyres already burning. The fear of contagion dissolves the bonds of obligation that hold Athenian society together. Those who tend the sick die in greatest numbers, and so people stop tending the sick. Men spend their wealth freely, believing they will not live to enjoy it. Lawlessness spreads, because punishment seems irrelevant when death arrives regardless of conduct. The fear of gods and the authority of law, Thucydides writes, restrain no one. The plague does not distinguish between the refugee sleeping against a wall and the strategos in his household on the slopes below the Acropolis. It enters the house of Pericles with the same indifference it enters every other. His sister, whose name the sources do not preserve, dies. His eldest legitimate son, Xanthippus, who had quarrelled bitterly with his father over money and publicly mocked him, dies before any reconciliation can be completed. His younger son, Pericles, whom Plutarch describes as the one Pericles loved most dearly, dies as well. Plutarch records that when Pericles places the funeral wreath upon Pericles, his composure finally breaks. The man who never wept in public, who maintained that Olympian reserve through decades of political warfare, is seen weeping openly over the body of his last legitimate son. The death toll defies precise calculation. Modern estimates suggest that between 1/4 and 1/3 of the Athenian population perishes over the course of the epidemic, which strikes in waves through 430 and returns in 429. Perhaps 4,500 hoplites die, perhaps 300 cavalry. The numbers Thucydides provides are partial, covering only military losses, and the true civilian toll remains beyond recovery. What can be measured is the strategic consequence. The fleet that sails under Pericles' command that summer loses more than 1,000 men to disease. The cavalry that should defend Attic borders is gutted. The manpower that sustains both the navy and the democracy is hemorrhaging from a wound no physician can close. The city that Pericles built behind walls of stone and strategy is devouring itself. The Parthenon gleams above streets where the dead go unburied. The treasury that funds the fleet funds funeral expenses. And the man who designed this fortress, who calculated every variable of war except the one that matters most, sits in a household emptied of his children, the wreath still in his hands. The anger comes before the grief has time to settle. Athens in the late summer of 430 before the Common Era is a city seeking someone to blame, and the man who told them to abandon their farms, who ordered them behind these walls where disease breeds in every shadow, stands exposed. The assembly that elected him strategos 15 consecutive times now turns with the speed that only democracies possess. A motion is brought. The sources differ on who proposes it, Cleon perhaps, or Simmias, or Lacratidas, and the people vote to strip Pericles of his command. For the first time in over a decade, he holds no office. The man who shaped Athenian policy as surely as Phidias shaped marble is now a private citizen, answerable to the courts. The trial follows swiftly. The charge is financial mismanagement, embezzlement of public funds, the same weapon his enemies wielded against Phidias years before. The courtroom on the slopes below the agora fills with jurors who weeks ago cheered his name. Thucydides records the fine, but not its exact amount. Later sources give figures ranging from 15 to 50 talents, a sum that would cripple even an aristocratic household. The verdict is guilty. The fine is imposed. Pericles pays it, or his friends pay it for him. The record is unclear. What is clear is the humiliation. The first citizen reduced to a defendant, his strategy denounced, his judgment questioned by the very democracy he perfected. He retreats into a household that plague has hollowed. His legitimate sons, Xanthippus and Pericles, are dead. His sister is dead. The friends who once filled his evenings with philosophical discourse are scattered. Anaxagoras in exile, Phidias dead in prison or in Elis, Damon ostracized. Aspasia remains, and the boy who bears his name, young Pericles, son of a Milesian woman, barred from citizenship by his father's own law of 451. Plutarch describes a man who maintained his composure through every political storm, finally breaking when he places the funeral wreath upon his last legitimate son. Tears come that no one in Athens had ever seen him shed. Yet the city discovers within months what his absence costs. Without his strategic coherence, the assembly lurches between proposals. Generals disagree. Naval expeditions lack coordination. The war continues, and no single mind holds its threads together. By the spring of 429, the demos reverses itself with the same volatile energy that condemned him. Pericles is re-elected strategos. The fine stands. They do not erase the conviction, but they restore the command, acknowledging in action what they cannot admit in words, that no one else can do what he does. He returns to the Knicks, but he is diminished. The plague that took his sons has touched him too. Plutarch, drawing on earlier sources now lost, describes a slow wasting, the disease working gradually, rather than with the violent speed it showed in others. In these final months, Pericles makes one personal request of the assembly. He asks them to grant an exception to the citizenship law, his own law, so that his son by Aspasia might be enrolled as an Athenian citizen. The people grant it. The irony needs no commentary from ancient writers, though they all note it. The deathbed scene comes in autumn of 429. Plutarch preserves an anecdote attributed to Theophrastus. Friends gathered around the dying man speak of his achievements, his 9 trophies of victory, his buildings, his years of leadership. Pericles, still conscious, interrupts, or so the story goes, remarking that they praise what fortune and circumstance share with others, while omitting what he considers his greatest claim, that no Athenian ever put on mourning clothes because of him. Whether these words are authentic or shaped by later tradition, they capture something essential about how he wished to be remembered. Not as conqueror, but as the man who wielded supreme power without becoming a tyrant, he dies as autumn light slants across the city he remade. The Parthenon catches that light above streets still marked by plague. The long walls still stand. The fleet still rules the Aegean. But the mind that held it all in balance is gone, and Athens will spend the next 25 years learning what that absence means. Within a year of his death, the consequences begin to reveal themselves. Cleon, a tanner's son with none of Pericles' restraint, rises to dominate the assembly through raw aggression and populist fury. The strategic patience that held Athens behind its walls dissolves into reckless expeditions. Demosthenes campaigns in Aetolia and fails. Brasidas carries Spartan arms into Thrace. The empire bleeds at its edges. In 421 before the Common Era, Cleon and Brasidas both die at Amphipolis, and a fragile peace follows, but it cannot hold. Athens launches the Sicilian expedition in 416, gambling its fleet and finest soldiers on the conquest of Syracuse. The disaster that follows in 413 destroys 200 triremes and 40,000 men. The Aegean allies revolt. Persia funds Spartan warships. In 404 before the Common Era, 25 years after Pericles closed his eyes, Lysander's fleet starves Athens into surrender. The long walls come down to the music of flutes. The empire is gone. Yet something survives that no Spartan garrison can dismantle. On the Acropolis, the Parthenon still stands, its metopes still telling stories of civilization's triumph over chaos, its cellar still housing the gold and ivory goddess Phidias shaped. The building outlasts the democracy that built it, outlasts Macedonian conquest, outlasts Roman absorption. When Plutarch writes his parallel biography around 100 of the Common Era, pairing Pericles with the Roman Fabius Maximus, he draws on sources now lost to us: Stesimbrotus, Ion of Chios, the comic poets, preserving details that Thucydides' austere history omitted, the salon of Aspasia, the helmet worn to conceal an elongated skull, the composure that never broke in public. Thucydides himself, writing in exile around 400 before the Common Era, constructs the literary Pericles we inherit, the funeral oration that may owe as much to the historian's art as to the statesman's tongue. Yet the portrait rings true because it matches the archaeological record, the building accounts inscribed on marble, the tribute lists recording allied payments year by year, the ostraca scratched with rivals' names. The man Thucydides describes, rational, foresighted, incorruptible, ultimately tragic, becomes the template against which all subsequent democratic leaders are measured. The Parthenon endures through transformations no Athenian could have imagined. It becomes a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary in the 6th century of the Common Era. Ottoman conquest in 1456 transforms it into a mosque, a minaret rising beside the ancient columns. In 1687, a Venetian mortar shell ignites Ottoman gunpowder stored within, blowing out the central structure. Lord Elgin removes half the surviving sculptures between 1801 and 1812, carrying them to London, where they remain, contested, magnificent, stripped of their original polychrome paint that time had already erased. Modern Athens rebuilds itself around the ruin. Archaeologists recover the tribute quota lists from the Acropolis slopes. Epigraphers reconstruct the building accounts that record payments to quarrymen, sculptors, and cart drivers. The democracy Pericles shaped, imperfect, imperial, exclusionary of women and slaves and foreigners, nonetheless becomes the origin story Western political thought tells about itself. His name attaches to an age, the Periclean moment, when philosophy, drama, architecture, and democratic governance converged in a single generation within a single city's walls. The Parthenon catches the same Attic light it caught when scaffolding still clung to its columns. Restoration crews now work where Phidias once directed his sculptors. The marble is honey gold at dawn, bone white at noon, rose-touched at dusk. 25 centuries have passed since a man who never wore a crown governed this city by persuasion alone. The stones remember what the chronicles confirm, that for one brief generation, human ambition built something that time itself has not yet managed to destroy. Thank you for joining this journey through the life and legacy of Pericles. If these stories of the ancient world have moved you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next chapter when history's greatest figures speak again.